Welcome to the Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my colleagues John Easton and Adam Belmar. John Easton, as you know, is a noted Oregonian, a Senate master of the Senate procedure, former chief of staff to Gordon Smith and Kelly Ayotte, a wine connoisseur, and overall great guy.
Thank you, John.
Here, here.
They're here. Adam is a native Washingtonian, a graduate of Boston University, a recovering journalist. He worked for the two Georges, Stephanopoulos and Bush. He's a master storyteller, especially with video. Right, Adam?
Correct.
I want to make one thing very clear this morning. This is not Guinness. I drank some Guinness last night. This is not Guinness. This is cold-pressed coffee from Commonwealth Joe. It fortifies us.
Nitro Brew.
Nitro Brew. Thank you very much for telling us that. We will, at some point in time, have a happy hour version of this wonderful podcast, which will have real Guinness. But this is nitro-infused Commonwealth Joe coffee.
More appropriate for 9:30 in the morning.
Theory one, Flake out. In an emotional and well-covered speech, Senator Jeff Flake announced that he was going to retire from the United States Senate as a way to protest against President Trump's Twitter tirades. Facing poll numbers of around 18%, Flake's departure means that Republicans can field a better candidate who can withstand a challenge from the likes of Kelly Ward. My theory, Flake is a nice guy who long ago decided he'd rather do something else with his life than do the dirty works of politics. His departure is not a negative for the GOP, especially to defend that seat. John Easton, what are your thoughts about Jeff Flake?
Yeah, John, I'm going to give him a little bit of the doubt here, Senator Flake. I mean, sure, we can say that his speech, his departure speech, or retirement speech, I should say, there are some contradictions from past statements or positions, or that perhaps he blazed this anti-Trump trail because Trump and his allies were intent on defeating him next November, or actually in the primary, and it looked very well like he could get defeated. But let's remember something. Senator Flake wrote this book, which was released recently in August of this year. His floor speech was very consistent with that book, which is denouncing the toxicity of our current state of politics. So in that sense, I think the senator was being true to his feelings, true to his principles. I think that what we have to remember is all 535 members of Congress have to do one thing. They have to be content with defending and debating and discussing these issues in this type of political environment every single day. And their heart, therefore, has to be into it. And in this case, I think that Senator Flake took a look at the environment and said, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Whether you want to blame the President of the United States or both sides, Republicans and Democrats and their respective bases. And he said, I don't think my heart is into it. And for that, I actually respect him.
I respect Jeff Flake. I think he's a great guy. I mean, he's really one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Very true to his own beliefs, his own religious beliefs, his own principles. I have had clashes with him in the past. When, for example, he came to the United States House of Representatives, he was a big anti-earmark crusader, and he was one of the reasons why we don't have earmarks anymore. And as I pointed out in my blog earlier this week, that when we got rid of earmarks, it was to mark the decline and fall of the popularity of the Congress. We have not, since we've gotten rid of earmarks in the Congress, we have not broken 20% as approval ratings since that time, which I think is remarkable. But Jeff Flake is a great guy. Nice guy. I think that he's offended by what Donald Trump presents to the body politic. I only make the observation that this kind of body politic, the political game, was well infected well before Donald Trump came on board. Adam Belmar, what are your thoughts on that?
Take wide shot, give opinion. I was much more down on the politics of this speech when it first occurred. In fact, I had some conversations with John Easton who helped me to put this in a better perspective. And I went back after you and I talked earlier this week, and I thought a lot about your point that you just made about the book. And I went back and I read something from the book, again, as Easton says, published in August. It was a big news story when it happened. He said something in the book that I think is really important for us to remember today. He said, I write this book because we as conservatives and conservatism itself are in crisis. But make no mistake, as a governing philosophy, conservatism is indeed in crisis, and not in spite of this apparent success, but because of it. This was, at its core, a rebuke, a repudiation of President Trump, of this, as Senator McCain has called it, spurious nationalism. He has great conviction on this, and some of the issues that he has decided to fall on his own sword over, including free trade and immigration, he's consistent on. And so I'm a little less cynical about what he said and where he said it and how he did it. But he did say one thing at the top of this speech, which given me pause all week, John Feehery. And Senator Flake said, there are times when we must risk our careers in favor of our principles. Now is such a time. I'm just not sure that he's risked his career by anything he said. He threw in the towel and walked away from his career at a time where that kind of genuine courage should show a man to stand up for what he believes in and fight the good fight through the primary.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of where I leave it.
Yeah, and I think that's I think you both make great points. I would say this, that one of the problems with Senator Flake is he lost touch with his voters. I mean, his popularity was 18% back in Arizona. That's not very good. And he kept pushing policies that his voters back home disagreed with him on. And so that's a problem. And you could talk about your principles, but part of about being a politician is representing the concerns of your constituents. And if your constituents don't like you, then you've got a huge problem. I mean, John Boehner used to say, being a leader means having people follow you. If you don't have that, you're just a man taking a walk in the park. And that's kind of what Jeff Flake was. He was a man taking a walk through the Senate, and that's a huge problem, Johnny.
Right, and I think that with the book, he really did get out there on a limb, because that was very much a philosophical treatise. And it wasn't, I haven't read the whole book, but I don't think, to your point, it was about Arizona politics, and I'm certainly not steeped enough in Arizona Republican politics to know, where he is or where he's not, but I think he really took a real dip after that book in particular, because I think it was just this screed that, against a president who really does have a connection in the state. And I think people were like trying to figure out, well, what is going on with this guy? And I think, to your point, John, when you go out on a national limb like that, like talking about political philosophy in a very national way, you are separating yourself out from your electorate more and more and more. So I just feel like with Senator Flake, I am going to miss him, because I feel like we need more people like him. Not necessarily to just throw in the towel and be like Trump, because Jeff Flake would never be like Trump. But I think just be yourself, continue fighting on, and I think we're going to get to a point where we can smooth out this political discourse. I don't know when.
And let me say this. I think that Senator Flake is a classy guy, but there are a lot of classy guys and female senators in the Senate. People who are exude class, who are exemplary human beings. I think of someone like a Roy Blunt. I think of someone like a Barrasso. I think of John Thune and John Cornyn and Mitch McConnell. You can go down the line. These people,
all very conservative.
All very conservative, all very classy people, all in touch with their constituents and listen to their constituents, and who don't use the rhetoric of Donald Trump. Trump is a singular, unique figure, and he's an anti-politician. He's not a politician. And he's also not really significantly conservative. And he's changed. I think he has changed the conservative movement, but he's also reflecting the concerns of a conservative populace that is not as free trade as it once was, and certainly is not as pro-immigration as it once was. And that is reflecting where we are as a society post-financial crisis and post-changing demographics of the country.
The word conservatism has come up, and Senator Flake has used it. But at the heart of what we're seeing right now, I believe, is more of a establishment versus anti-establishment. Right. And the president is so clearly anti-establishment that the establishment Republicans who are coming in against him are somehow just being marginalized as, the enemy. And I think it honestly ties into Bannon and everything that people have been talking about, you've been writing about, and it just leaves me wondering, what a Republican majority, if it can be sustained in 18, could possibly look like.
Well, I mean, it's a really good question. It talks about, liberals like to talk about how, and Democrats like to talk about how the Republican Party is fundamentally broken. But, for a broken party, they're doing pretty well in the polls. I mean, they got the White House, they got the House, the Senate. They're going to dominate the Supreme Court. They dominate almost all of the state legislatures. And there is this anti-establishment versus establishment thing. I do think that the establishment has to understand where the people are frustrated, and the only way to deal with that frustration is actually get some results. And the failure of Obamacare was terrible for the establishment. So John McCain might have thought he was doing himself, everyone a favor, but it was bad for the establishment. John Easton, what do you think about that?
I just don't know exactly what anti-establishment means, and I don't know if a lot of members of Congress know exactly what the anti-establishment means, because does that mean that you stop helping the machinery work inside the halls of Congress to drive toward a consensus piece of legislation so that you can get things done?
Right.
If you do that, are you establishment? I still think that is such an open question about what all this means. What is establishment? What is anti-establishment? And how do you work through it?
You're absolutely right. I have no idea, and that may be why the younger generation and the folks who are at the core of this nationalism and populism that supported the president are so disconnected from me, and why I'm disconnected from them.
Well, I think in many ways, being anti-establishment is not a thing of issues; it's a thing of attitude.
Right.
And I think back to when I worked for Bob Michael, and Bob Michael was the House Minority Leader, very classy guy, used his words very carefully, had a very conservative voting record, and an upstart named Newt Gingrich came up, had a much more liberal voting record, but had this bombastic rhetoric where he'd be throwing these rhetorical bombs all over the place. And he was seen as a hero because it wasn't about the issues, it was about the attitude. And I think of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, we're not quite sure where he is, but he's trending much more conservative on a lot of the issues. But his heart is all over the place on that. We don't know where he is. Let me just say this one last thing. His rhetoric is the thing that gets people to love him.
I just wanted to pop in and say that Dan Kent, who's watching, is enjoying the conversation. He offered an amen. So when we get that kind of activity on the Feehery live Facebook feed, we want to let you know we're listening and looking to hear what you're thinking as well.
Adam is especially
especially Adam. Any last thoughts on this? All right. Theory 2, Showdown at Gulch.
2.
Dose. With House passage of a Senate budget resolution, the stage is set for the House and the Senate to complete work on a tax cut package, not tax reform package, tax cut package that will be Donald Trump's first big accomplishment, legislative accomplishment, as president. That means that every lobbyist in town is beating a pathway to the House Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committees. My theory, this bill will be a Christmas present for the American people, which will have more Democrats voting for it than Republicans voting against it, unlike the budget resolution that had no Democrats voting for it and 20 Republicans voting against it. John, we've been following some tax issues here at EFB Worldwide Headquarters on behalf of some clients. How ugly is this going to get?
I would say look no further than the budget resolution yesterday passed by the House, 216 to 212. That is a major, narrow, razor-thin margin. That is the first major step toward this big tax bill. That really gets it off the ground, gives it a lot of momentum. Will it get ugly? I think anytime you have a bill of this consequence, like the health care repeal and replace bill that was defeated earlier this year, once you have a bill of that kind of consequence for the American people, absolutely it's going to get ugly. And in part, I think, back to the politics of our last segment, it is, are people going to bust their pick on a parochial issue all the way to the end, or are they going to do a little give and take? If you don't have some sort of compromise about you as you go toward it, whether it's expanding child tax credit, mortgage interest deduction, I mean, the deducting state and local taxes from your federal returns, these are huge issues that we're about ready to encounter. If there isn't a little bit of give and take in the process, in the legislation of the sausage making, then it will get very ugly. And I think you're going to see a lot of that establishment versus anti-establishment all over again. This is just going to be a display.
I think, I mean, Adam, I'm going to turn to you for a second, but it is going to be a geographical fight too. And we see that with, if you're from a high tax state, you want to be able to deduct those state and local taxes from your federal return. And it's going to be also interest-based. Adam, what do you think is going to be the best selling point for this tax package as it emerges next week?
Well, that's a very pointed question, and I'm not sure I have a specific answer. I am enthused by the fact that we're talking about really substantive elements of tax reform, and I know you made the point of saying they're really talking about tax cuts, but at the heart of this is reform. And I also appreciated John Easton's metaphors on food. I mean, we're often told that salt in our diet is bad, but when it comes to state and local taxes, salt is good. Some people say. We also saw...
There's a little bit too much salt at the state and local level, though, right?
There may be a little bit too much salt.
Especially in D.C.
The other thing that I think is very interesting when we talk about tax reform in general paying for all of this was this issue that came up this week, a bit of a miscalculation perhaps between the budget chairman, Kevin Brady, and the President of the United States on the issue of 401ks. And it boils down to this. Of course 401ks are important. Everybody knows what they are. A lot of people's employers contribute, and it is a core part of a post-pension world for personal retirement savings. And yet people are starting to realize, wait, hold on a second. Roth IRA versus regular IRA, 401k. John, what does this boil down to? It boils down to
when you pay the taxes.
When you pay the taxes.
And actually,
when the Treasury gets the money.
And exactly, it's a timing mechanism, and it helps in the out years if you do a Roth IRA. Actually, it helps now if you.
Now.
It helps now because you have to pay it on the way in.
Tax now.
It's after-tax income goes into your thing, and then you don't have to pay taxes later on. With the 401k as it's set up now, you get pre-tax income to put in there, and then theoretically you're supposed to pay taxes once you are above 65 when you are able to get
That's
this.
not theoretical. That's very real.
That's legit.
Yeah, that's very legit.
It's really legit. And you get penalized if you take the money out early. So, but this is going to be a big issue that's not settled yet.
Right.
And it does save some money for the tax writers. And why that's important is the tax writers, John Easton, are trying to get the corporate tax rate to 20%. And the problem with that, and we've been a group that supported this in the past, is that it's not very popular with the American people. But Donald Trump wants to get there, right?
Very much so. And I think that the most in Congress know that, even a lot of Democrats know that reducing the corporate rate, the corporate tax rate, will generate a lot of positive economic activity, probably more jobs. But I think that to Adam's point earlier about the president weighing in and basically saying, oh, by the way, 401ks, yeah, we're not doing that. It reminded me of...
It was a bit of a smackdown.
A little smackdown.
We're not doing that.
I read Showdown at Gulch, a great book by a former Wall Street Journal reporter of the 1986 tax reform process and eventual victory of tax reform. And it just... Ronald Reagan wouldn't have come out there and just slammed a sledgehammer through the middle of it. He probably would have had his Treasury Secretary say, by the way, we're not going to probably move on this too far, and behind closed doors. This is a different president, as we talked about earlier, so it's going to be a vastly different process with a lot of attitude.
So there's, I think the corporate tax rate is something that is exciting for the business community, for individual taxpayers. One thing that they're talking about is doubling the personal exemption from 12,000 to 24,000. John Easton, what that does is it makes it a lot fewer taxpayers will itemize. And so what is the impact there on the mortgage interest deduction?
Right. I mean, I think it really is a domino effect. One policy affects the other like that. I think another factor here is they're talking about maybe not touching the top rate, like keeping it as is, and on the lower rate, a couple million more will probably have to pay no taxes at all. You can see that trying to get to that middle class dynamic of the leaders here in this process. You can see the politics really coming into play. Now, they're releasing, the House of Representatives, the Ways and Means Committee is releasing the draft next Wednesday,
Right.
November 1st. And at that point, Katie, bar the doors. I mean, it is going to be big.
And I might want to throw it back to you, but I want to say that the big parameters of this, they want to cut about $4.5 trillion in taxes. And then in the budget resolutions, they provided for $1.5 trillion in tax cuts. And so they have $3 trillion that they've got to cover, which means that there are other things that are on the possible chopping block that tax writers have to think, how do we fit this all in? What do you think, Adam?
Well, one of the things that I've noted, and you said this right at the top of this theory, that lobbyists across Washington are beating a path to the door of the House Ways and Means Committee. When you talk about the mortgage interest deduction, I think if you look very closely, it's interesting to see the disparity of opinion between the Mortgage Bankers Association and what they're prepared to accept on this, and the National Association of Realtors. For one group, the MID is critical. It can't be compromised. For another one, it's like, well, 6 of one, half dozen the other. As long as we can, even it out over time, we're happy to make a shift. And there are a lot of very individual entrepreneur people out there in the real estate business who are saying, you have no idea what something like this could do to impact homeowners, certainly first-time homeowners.
I would warn our listeners, especially if you are on those committees, one other thought that people have been bandied about that was in the so-called camp draft, which was the original blueprint drafted by former Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp, which included potentially an idea of taxing or making it amortizing the tax on the advertising as a business expense. And we have some clients that care about this. I would say that there's no more essential part of a business than advertising.
Right.
And increasing taxes on advertising or making it less of a successful way to expense advertising is I think a critical mistake. This whole tax package is all about economic growth. Taxing advertising, I don't think leads to economic growth.
That's right, and I think when you talk to members or staff on Capitol Hill and in the administration, I think that is the overall goal is in this package, let's do whatever we can to bring about tax relief across the board. But let's not harm economic activity. Let's not harm, some of the things that are going well right now. One of that is by deducting full expenses on advertising and other expenses by business. And if you start cutting into that, I think especially at the local level, these small businesses that really depend on that the deduction will really be harmed, especially on say advertising.
Can I make one last point? I just see a lot of people doing events around this, and one that really caught my eye this week was conducted by the Business Roundtable, BRT. They brought together the CEOs of some of the most well-known and successful U.S. companies, and they talked about the impact of the corporate rates specifically, and CEOs like Randall Stevenson at AT&T, and they had the head of UPS, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan was there, and others talked about the enormous amount of capital investment that is already going on in our economy and in infrastructure. These things tie together. When these CEOs are talking about numbers in the $20 billion a year or more annual investments, that proves to me that they are serious about making the kind of investments that the president is counting on when he talks about economic growth.
And I'll make one final point. This tax reform, the reform part of this tax bill will be about trying to clamp down or incentivize companies that are move their operations overseas to bring their investments back to the United States and pay American taxes. And I think that'd probably be one of the best parts of this tax package. If we can make America a great place to do business again, and more importantly, a great place to have your headquarters in, and try to clamp down or stop the flight of capital and flight of companies overseas. I mean, there's a lot of high-tech companies, a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are, and I'm a big Irishman. I love here's to Ireland. You know, you shouldn't locate your headquarters in Ireland just so you can avoid American taxes, especially if you're basically an American company.
Thanks, Congress.
Thanks, Congress, for not reforming the tax code.
Sláinte.
Any last thoughts on tax package? I will say that the Ways and Means Committee is expected to unveil their markup next week. So it's going to be a big week at Gulch. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting stuff. And I would imagine that there's a lot of movement to get this thing marked up in the House and Senate before Thanksgiving.
Well, the fact that the Senate might be in during the week of Thanksgiving,
That didn't feel like a threat. That felt like a promise
not
from
might.
McConnell.
I think it's likely. And if that is the fact, I think that, well, one, this is very real. It also means these guys really want to abide by this timetable.
Which really means one most important thing for those of you who aren't going home for Thanksgiving. Now's the time to make your reservations for Thanksgiving dinner. There are very few places of note that will serve you a great Thanksgiving dinner. I already made mine. I've got family coming in. We will be dining once again at the Palm Restaurant in downtown Washington, D.C.
I'm sure most of you will as well.
Right. You ever think about cooking a turkey?
You know, that's what my
It's
mom
slightly
says.
cheaper.
No, we're going to have lobster at the Palm.
Well, anyway. All right, theory 3. Shouted out who killed the Kennedys when, after all, it's you and me. President Trump announced earlier this week that he was going to allow the National Archives to release everything they have on the assassination of Jack Kennedy. Well, we know that they didn't release everything, but they're still working on it.
What a cluster.
While this probably won't stop conspiracy theorists like Roger Stone, a big supporter of Donald Trump and during the presidential election, from speculating about the involvement of the CIA or President Johnson in the assassination of the president, it certainly puts President Kennedy back in the spotlight. My theory: the president brilliantly claimed credit for something that was going to happen anyway and showed again why he's a PR genius. Adam Belmar, what are your thoughts on this whole episode?
First of all, I love it when the president takes credit for the sun rising in the morning. Somebody told him that this was coming out. He decided to quickly co-opt it and say, I'm releasing these things. Of course, the truth of the matter was that he was the only one who could stop it from happening. So he reversed that, and God bless his heart for spinning it the way he did. But, I also have, because folks who are watching us this morning on the Feehery Theory know, as John just alluded, not all of the stuff went out.
Which is kind of a bummer.
Well, actually, I have this vision of like the Men in Black showing up down there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and just sitting outside. They're like, Mr. President, I have something I need to show you. And, and then like after they briefed him, they held up the pen and they went, and they erased his mind on the thing. But look, 2,800 pages are still being held back. There's something there. It feeds the controversy. And if I could just sort of channel my inner George W. Bush, I'd say, distractification. Hashtag distractification. The president is distractifying the American people.
Distractification. John Easton, do you have any thoughts on distractification?
I believe there's always distractification with this White House. But I agree with you, John, and to your point out about this being a very good move. I mean, if it wasn't his doing necessarily, the way he promoted it, the way he got it out there, got ahead of it, really was brilliant. And I was watching a cable show that had one of the Secret Service agents.
Yeah.
I think he was the guy on the car.
I heard him on NPR, but yes, he's been out there.
I think his name's Clint.
Right.
He was very enthusiastic about these documents being released. He said basically the more the better. I mean, let's keep moving through this. But one thing it did do for me, I mean, my entire life has been about, not about JFK, but I've heard about this conspiracy from a young child. I remember the books on my parents' bookshelf about JFK, and so it's always been there. And what this really guarantees is that we'll be there for the rest of my life.
You couldn't be more right.
It really is a fascinating issue, and I think if you go to Dealey Plaza in Dallas, and I had never been there before, about, 10 years ago I went, and yes, it's a somber experience, but it is fascinating just to be there. One, it hasn't changed, I don't think, really an iota from when this happened. Everything is still really in place. So when you see the
knoll is
pictures, the
still
video,
grassy.
when you go there, that's exactly the way it looks. And it kind of pulls you in even more to try to understand and think about what happened. I think this whole thing is fascinating.
So I read Roger Stone's book. I found it very persuasive. There is an element here where someone in these released files said that Lyndon Johnson was to blame for all of this. Not saying that he was, but I looked at Phil Sheenan's book, and I think Philip Zellico also wrote a book about this, and about the Warren Commission and how that put together. And that was a haphazard operation, so much so that when the House Committee on Assassinations did an investigation of the Warren Commission and of the president's assassination, they concluded there was a conspiracy. This was actually
That was an investigation of the investigation?
it was an investigation of the investigation, and this was a professional job, and they concluded there was a conspiracy, and now the CIA is saying, stop, you can't release this stuff, and I think that makes the CIA look like they're trying to hide something.
Well, it could be damn if you do and damn if you don't for them.
Right.
Because it either looks like they may be trying to hide something and people question them even more, or you release it and they look bad because there are lots of things in there that illuminate CIA mistakes or crazy rat holes they went down. And I think you're going to get both.
Well, I think you're right, and that's the other thing, right? I mean, was there a conspiracy? I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. I was still not born yet. I don't think that LBJ had JFK knocked off. I mean,
Comment now if you believe that John Feehery wasn't alive November 22nd, 1963.
there's no conspiracy on that. But like you, John, I've been hearing about this forever.
Yeah.
From my earliest memories, I remember my mom having a book about JFK. And, as an Irish Catholic, it's even more kind of poignant to me about all of this and ingrained in my family my mother's Democrat.
My mom just said she's watching live.
My dad was a big Republican, and my dad had no great love of JFK. But still, from an Irish Catholic perspective, this has kind of occupied a fascination with me. And I really, was proud that the president said we're going to release all this stuff. I can't wait till we also release all the information we have on UFOs, because that's going to be really exciting.
Well, the most cynical among us are saying the president's, rushing to release the Kennedy documents, but he's still holding back his own taxes. So
Of course.
Well, that's because he's under audit.
That's right.
So, Adam, we're going to start with you on our final lightning round.
Did we do 3 theories?
We did. The third theory was the third theory.
Okay. Because I had a theory that I wanted to put in, but it didn't get in the show this week.
Well, please give us your theory.
Okay. My bonus theory is that the President of the United States should be commended and be taken very seriously for the event that he held yesterday at the White House, declaring a public health emergency on the issue of opioids. This is a crisis, and to hear that it is deeply understood at the highest levels of our government post-election is quite wonderful. I saw something this morning that I wanted to bring up, knowing that I would hopefully be able to get this.
We're really good at the theory. If you have a theory, please, and if you want to give us your theories
Message us
online,
now.
we'll mention it.
We definitely will. Anyway,
Improv.
Keegan Hamilton over at Vice News filed on this yesterday, and the headline read, "Trump's answer to opioid crisis is $57,000 and just say no." And I love the cynical nature of news coverage because, yes, the public health emergency declaration at this moment in time brings with it about $57,000 in emergency funds that are sitting in a depleted account over at HHS. And then, of course, the president did talk about a Nancy Reagan-esque just say no ad campaign. But I look right past that. I look at a president who talked very personally about his own brother, his struggles, and about somebody who brought his wife to the event, who's working hard on the issue. And while we can't fix it quickly and there's more to be done, I was deeply heartened that the president brought it up yesterday.
I want to throw something else on this topic, which I thought was fascinating. There was a study that showed that in Colorado, because of the increased use of pot, that opioid addiction has gone down. So maybe, more pot means less opioids, and we raise some money with taxing pot to pay for all the people on opioids.
So a tax increase is what John Feehery is looking for. I would comment on Adam's bonus round here because he just took away my buy and sell idea that I had that happens at the end of the
I have
podcast.
two
See
for
what
that
happens
segment.
with.
You want me to give you one?
See what happens with live podcast. So I watched the press conference yesterday, the event yesterday, and I'm going to add kudos to Melania Trump. She kicked it off, and I watch her, and we don't see a ton of Melania. I think we're seeing her more and more now, but it was an excellent presentation because it was extremely heartfelt about a lot of the visits that she's been making to crisis centers, those who care for infants who are addicted to opioids. It was very powerful, and so you can argue about whether it should have been a national emergency or a public health emergency or the funds haven't been released yet, but that it is getting this kind of attention from the very highest in our government, the president and the first lady, that speaks volumes. And as a former staffer with a Senator Ayotte, who was deeply involved with trying to find solutions to this opioid problem, obviously New Hampshire's ravaged, just like so many other states are ravaged by this. I can tell you, in the Senate, in the halls of Congress, it is a major priority.
New England and Senator Ayotte did a lot of work to help educate this president about this issue.
Yeah.
And I think that can't be understated in terms of understanding why he's come to it so forcefully now.
Yeah, and Senator Portman and Senator
yeah.
Shelley Moore Capito. There are so many. I mean, you could go on and on and on, and deservedly so. This is a big problem, and kudos to all members that are stepping up in a big way on this issue.
I was going to say, especially Rob Portman, who's really taken the reins from Kelly Ayotte and pushed it, and he made it as big a big part of his negotiations on Obamacare, repeal and replace, and the Medicaid funding, because he knew he needed more money. Mm-hmm. And that goes to the big hole in this argument that the president put forward. They need to pay for it.
Right.
And we need the more money.
I think Congress needs to pay.
Congress needs to step up and pay because it's a huge issue. Finally, our lightning round. What are you buying or selling today, John Easton?
So he picks on me first since I need to think of a new one.
It was a little cruel.
The good news is I got to back up. I'm buying Amazon because they seem to be taking over the world right now. I don't believe this will last forever, but when you read about their market share being $500 billion, and then I'm selling department stores for the same reason. And like, for instance, Sears' market share now is down to $50 billion. So you just see now this dichotomy of the digital economy just rising and sort of the old economy falling. And I'm a guy who will go into any department store. I love to walk around, shop, browse.
Oh, he'll shop.
I'll shop. But I think that it's still, Amazon is a good bet.
Adam Belmar, what are you buying or selling today?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm buying and I'm selling. I am buying Elon Musk in a week or 2 week period where they continue over at SpaceX to send national security payloads and the like into space flawlessly with reusable rockets. Mr. Musk also installed solar power at a hospital in Puerto Rico where children are in extreme danger. Nobody impresses me more, moves quickly, and gets things done like Elon Musk. I'm very excited. Bye, bye, bye. And on the sell side, I am selling. I don't know if anyone's buying, but I am selling Whitefish Energy Holdings, small company you might never have heard of, but they were given a no-bid contract to rebuild the energy grid in Puerto Rico, and this is a shitstorm, and it's just now spinning up.
Well, listen, I think they're going to do pretty well. Actually, I buy that stock, and I'm going to buy.
All right, I'll be selling you.
I'm going to buy what you're selling. So this is what I'm buying, and then selling. I'm buying Donald J. Trump. He's going to get the tax thing passed. He's going to have Mitch McConnell get his Supreme Court nominees through. That's what he's spending Thanksgiving really doing. He's going to go to Asia, and I think he's going to look very good in Asia. It's going to be proven that the Russia thing had more to do with Democrats conspiring with the Russians to sink Donald Trump. More about that and less about the Russians conspiring with Trump to defeat Hillary Clinton. So I really believe that I would buy as much Donald J. Trump stock as humanly possible. And when it comes to selling, I had a really good sale that just passed my mind. You know, I know this is what it is. My sell is Ralph Northam, who is Northam, who I can't even say his name. He is the.
You've been bashing the lieutenant governor.
He is the Democrat candidate for governor in Virginia. He has made several notable mistakes in his campaign. He has, sadly for him, gotten himself on the side of MS-13, which is not where you want to be in a campaign where MS-13 gang members are terrorizing the suburbs of Northern Virginia. And he's going to get beat by between 5 and 8 points. I would sell Ralph Northam, and I'd buy Donald J. Trump. And I want to make one last comment when we move on from our buy and sell. I want to talk a little bit about our plants and our guys who, do you want to talk about this?
Well, we have a number of assets besides human capital here at EFB Advocacy. And we have this great facility, some of which you get to see every week when we do this podcast. One such asset that we have is this wonderful rooftop patio, which we're going to start to broadcast from soon.
We are awesome.
But I'll do it, Trump. In the next couple weeks, probably you're going to see that. But we are greatly appreciative of all the support that we get from Dennison Landscaping. It is a family-owned, multi-generational business, one of the largest landscaping companies in the Mid-Atlantic, a huge employer in Maryland. And they love us. We've worked with them, and we love them, and they've really upped our game, and we are excited. If you are interested in watching the Feehery live, possibly from the EFB roof deck, furnished with amazing botanicals from Dennison Landscaping, you should message below.
And Adam, I would say that you were looking down the street and saw trees that were planted by Dennison.
That is a great point. Dennison Landscaping, in addition to beautifying homes, businesses, and residential communities around the Washington, D.C. area, also has the contract for street trees along our Washington, D.C. streets, including the one right outside my front door and across Eastern Market and Capitol Hill. That's Dennison Landscaping, planting those trees and making Washington, D.C. the green beauty that she is.
Smart pick by the government of Washington, D.C.
We have done some work with Dennison Landscaping,
We have.
especially on the issue of H-2B workers. They've been very, very kind to us, and we just wanted to give a special shout out to them. Thank you for joining us at the Feehery today, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB stands for
Excellent for business.
Yeah, baby.